Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to read all the way through that really long blog post that I wrote, and even then clicking on this button to watch this video. I'm really excited about this post because it's offered some new insight for myself about how I raise my own children and the work that I'm doing to hopefully create in them some self-reliance, responsibility, and maturity as they grow into the preteen years and even into adulthood. I'm thankful for this book that I recently read by Ben Sass, The Vanishing American Adult, which provoked some of the thoughts that I had for this blog post, and thought that I would just share a few of the ideas that I had as I was reading the book regarding the practical ideas that he gave in the book and how to raise self-reliant children. So the first thing that he talks about after he builds his case for why there's a problem of the vanishing American adult in our culture is he talks about fleeing age segregation. So there's another book that this kind of connected to for me by a guy named Neil Postman, and he wrote a book called The Disappearance of Childhood. And he talked about how once in our culture there was compulsory education and all teenagers were relegated to high schools rather than the workforce, being out in society during the day and those types of things, and all teenagers were put into high schools. He talks about the development of what he calls adolescent ghettos. Basically, these high schools are places to warehouse adolescents so that they keep themselves out of trouble. They are, being developed into the good citizen, as is the hope, I imagine, for many parents and educators in schools. But he also identifies a problem with that because after some years of having these adolescent ghettos, again, as he calls them, adolescents began to develop their own culture, a culture very much separate from the culture of the adults in the world. And so adults, kind of had a hard time understanding that culture, were not in that culture. And then adolescents had a hard time understanding the culture of adults. And therefore, the only feedback that adolescents were getting were from other adolescents rather than from adults, which means they've missed out on a lot of wonderful wisdom that comes from having lived a longer and more experienced life. And so in the book, Ben Sass talks about the importance of exposing our children and adolescents to older adults, to people from across the generations, so that our children can learn from them and really begin to have an understanding that life is finite, that they are not, indestructible, and that they need to make the best of their life and make choices in their life that are positive for them, because in the end, if they don't, it can really have an impact on their life. One of the things he talks about is the importance of having an experience of a funeral, or realizing that death is a real thing. Because when we see older people who are sick or who have passed away, that really creates in us a sense of, wow, this whole death thing is real, and I really have to organize my life and take some stock of what I'm going to do with my life, because I am going to die someday. So it creates some true reality to the idea of death. There was a quote in the chapter that said, "The cure for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity." And this just really kind of highlighted this idea that curiosity creates this wonderful experience in life of new discoveries every single day. So I've kind of tried to take an approach with my kids recently after reading that quote, when they tell me they're bored, which they do more often than I would like, saying, well, go be curious. What is there to discover in our backyard? What could you discover out in the garage that you could create something out of? So this idea that really is true, curiosity is the cure for boredom. He also talked about the idea of embracing work pain and kind of creating a work ethic in our children. I read another book by the author Mirko Gliano, which is a hard one to pronounce, and he talked about the importance of meaningful work for children, and that in today's culture, unfortunately, well, I guess that there are benefits, obviously, to child labor laws, But one thing that I'm finding is that it's really, really difficult for teenagers to get their first work experience. And sometimes they'll go off to college never having had the opportunity to have a real job because they can't get a job maybe till they're 16, or they're so busy playing sports that there's no time for a job, or so busy doing vacations or other things that there's no opportunity to have a real job where there's real responsibility. And so Mercogliano recommends starting out at a very, very young age, offering our children meaningful work. And that could be done, from the age of 2 all the way up through the age of 16. And he describes meaningful work as tasks that have inherent purpose. So there's a real purpose to this task. It's just not some silly thing that I'm just going to have you do just because I want to keep you busy, but it has an actual purpose. Second, it's sufficiently novel. There's something new about this task or something challenging about this task that creates a desire for the child to do it because it's novel, it's new, it's challenging. 3, the child has control over the conditions of completing that task. So they're going to be given the task and they're going to be given some level of control over how to do it, when to do it, and mostly how they're going to accomplish that thing. So what doesn't work is, to be given a task and then have the adult or parent standing over the child and telling them exactly how to do it and when to do it. That sort of just takes the fun out of the opportunity for the child, whereas giving them control over the task really creates this sense of novelty and really a sense of pride in the child, and that I'm doing this and I'm doing it on my own and I can do this. I am responsible. And then lastly, that they can see the fruits of their labor. So when they do the task, there's a direct correlation to, yep, I saw what I did, I accomplished it, that feels good, that's really nice. So meaningful work as this idea of embracing the pain of work and creating a work ethic. This chapter also talked a lot about the difference between production and consumption, and made an argument that a lot of meaning and purpose in life is derived from being a producer rather than being a consumer. We live in a culture of consumption where we are constantly constantly berated, or constantly given messages about how we need to consume, consume, consume. And his argument is that we could consume all day, every day, consume more and more and more every day, and never will that consumption make us satisfied or happy. We will just continue to want to consume more. Whereas production creates in us a sense of accomplishment, a sense of meaning, and is actually more helpful in creating meaning in life than any level of consumption. There's another quote from this chapter that said that we should be helping our kids to get to a place where they experience freedom in their work rather than freedom from work. And that was a powerful quote for me, where they have this sense of freedom to just enjoy their work and even to work with reckless abandon in some ways and just really love that, rather than freedom from work, where I'm not going to work. I want to be free from it. I want to recreate all of the time. I have a friend who does this. He just loves to work and works harder than anybody I know, but he loves it and experiences a real sense of freedom in that work, embracing work pain. Next, he talks about the importance of consuming less. And there's a quote in the book. It's actually on page 151, and it comes from Socrates. But it says, "He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have." And this is again that idea of being content, and that consumption will not make one happy. I've definitely had this experience myself where, I'm going to get this new thing and it's going to be really cool, and it's going to really help to fill that void that I have in my life. I get that thing, a couple days later, there's that feeling of void and that feeling of yuckiness again, of wanting the next thing. And I'm sure many of you have had that experience of just getting that thing and then realizing that it's not all it's cracked up to be. I had a wonderful conversation with one of my sons recently, kind of about this idea, where he began to come to the conclusion that, things aren't going to make me happy. There's so much more important things that, and possessions are not the things that are going to make me happy. It is only through a relationship with Christ that I'll experience true happiness and true contentment is the thing that he came to realize. And so I was pleased with that, but also hopeful that he continues to hold on to that truth as he moves throughout his life in the future. And the final thing that I want to talk about, just as some thoughts that I have in regards to the pointers that were given in this book, is the idea of traveling to see. And in this chapter, Sass differentiates between tourism and travel. And he describes tourism as, again, consumption. This is a trip that you're taking, and maybe you're being shuttled from historical landmarker to historical landmarker. You stand in front of it for a few minutes, take a picture or selfie in front of it, and okay, you check that off the list. I've seen the Washington Monument, or I've seen the Trevi Fountain, and I can say that I've done that now. That's basically consumption of these historical landmarkers. And maybe there's no real understanding of what the significance of that landmarker is, why you're there, the things that went into the development of the stories behind that landmarker. Whereas travel, he describes as really a process of discovery, discovering the historical significance of any landmarker that you go to, the culture of the people involved in that landmarker, understanding the perspectives of the people surrounding that landmarker, the perspectives of the people in that country and in the region of the world or region of the United States that you're traveling to. And that's the real important thing that I think, one of the real important things I gathered from this chapter is just this idea of discovery, that travel can be something where we're discovering an alternative perspective. Because I think one of the problems in our culture is that people have a very hard time seeing from someone else's perspective. And if we can use travel with our children to help them gain a perspective of, how does a person in Mexico, or how does a person in Canada or France or some other country see the world differently than I do, then as they grow up into adults, they can have a more critical eye and critical ability to be able to see the world from another person's perspective, which creates a dialogue in our culture that is not present now, because we definitely need more dialogue rather than argument. So those are some of the thoughts that I had reading this book over the last several weeks and in writing the blog post that you just read through. I sure am hopeful that it was helpful for you, and I do recommend going out to get this book, reading through it yourself, and implementing some of the ideas given by the author. So hopefully, you could have some opportunity to instill some self-reliance in your children. As always, feel free to make some comments. The question down there is, do you think these things would be helpful in raising your kids and building a self-reliant child in your home? Leave your comment. Critical analysis is always helpful. I'd love to have a discussion with you. See you next time.